Our next speaker is Sheldon Helms. Sheldon is a professor of experimental psychology at Ohlone College. Lovely university out there. Me and the SGU and I got to visit out there a little while back. It was really fun. His talk is called Straight Talk about Gay Conversion. His hiding place when he was young was nowhere because he had a very small house with a lot of brothers and sisters and there was no place to hide anything ever. It's a different kind of hiding, but yeah. His favorite candy bar is a Marathon bar. Remember Marathon bars? Oh yeah, they were great. This sort of lattice kind of chocolate goodness. He prefers showers to baths. His boat name is my favorite so far. It's the Enola Really Gay. And of course, if he could have any answer to any question he would ask, what is Hugh Jackman's cell number? Sorry, I messed that up. What is Hugh Jackman's cell number? I was so excited to get it out. Please welcome the one and only Sheldon Helms.
Thank you. Thanks. Thanks, George. And I'm always nervous to talk to skeptics. I teach 300 students every 16 weeks, and you guys scare the hell out of me. I don't know why that is. Maybe because I've got Harriet Hall sitting here and Margaret Downey listening to me and all these people that I really admire. But I start out every talk thanking one person. And he's the reason that I'm here, and he's probably the reason that a lot of you are here. And his name is James Randi. Yes, let's hear it for Randi. I'm honored to call him a friend. So thank you, George. Thank you to Bruce and the organizers of this wonderful conference here for allowing me to speak on this important topic called gay conversion therapy. Let me start out by asking all of you, how many of you came here today to be converted? No one? Okay. That's actually a good thing. I'm glad I don't see any hands because I don't know what else you heard, but this shit doesn't work. So gay conversion therapy, it goes by many different names. Gay to straight therapy was one of the earliest. Reparative therapy. SOCI, which is my favorite, it stands for Sexual Orientation Change Efforts. Makes it sound kind of sciencey, right? But whatever the name is generally defined as a wide array of pseudoscientific and quasi-religious procedures designed to change one's orientation from homosexual to heterosexual, never the reverse. Sorry. Should probably dress better, but... So these efforts are always fruitless, of course, and that's where the harm comes in, because they inevitably fail. And when they fail, the victims of gay conversion therapy can have some very dark and dangerous outcomes. So the truth is, we don't yet know what causes, what creates sexual orientation. But this talk really isn't about that. It's about harming people. Specifically, it's about the harm that is created when we teach people that an innocuous difference, like their sexual orientation, needs to be changed to suit the desires of others. A wise man once said, "When people can't control their emotions, they try to control your behavior." Isn't that a great line? I wish I had thought of it. So these facts have not escaped the attention of a number of people in the professional community, and gay conversion has been denounced in policy statements by dozens of health and education organizations over the years in the US and abroad, and for good reason. They all have the same outcome: nothing, no change, no effect. Well, that's not entirely true. There is an effect. Unfortunately, those effects tend to be shame, depression, mental illness, and in extreme cases, suicide. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among young people ages 10 to 24. Compared to their straight peers, gay and lesbian teens are 5 times more likely to attempt suicide. And gay youth who come from highly rejecting families are 8.4 times more likely to have attempted suicide in comparison to families and peers who support them. And each episode of anti-gay victimization, harassment, and abuse increases the likelihood of self-harm by an average of 2.5 times. So you're probably wondering, well, how prevalent is this? And up until just last month, I wouldn't have been able to answer that with numbers. And then came along this study. A study at the Williams Institute at UCLA School of Law, which shows that Approximately 20,000 LGBT youth in the US will receive conversion therapy before the age of 18. About 698,000 LGBT adults in the US alone have already been subjected to it. And they estimate that about 57,000 youth will receive conversion therapy from religious or spiritual advisors. And that will become important later on when we start talking about the law. So I show this picture every year to my students to prove to them that I was young once. They don't believe me without evidence, which is good and insulting at the same time. So I was a young gay dude at one point, and now I'm an older gay dude. And I'm going to tell you a story now that I have never told in public. I've only told some close friends and one group of podcasters. And it started back in the 80s, around the time that this photo was taken, when I didn't really like myself all that much. I joined a church group, which is unusual, being raised by an atheist mother and a Jewish father. You wouldn't think I would join a church. But I joined it not because I believed in the Jesus, but because I wanted to sing. And they had this great choir. And so my friend Lisa said, "You should come sing with us." And I said, "Okay, where?" And she said, "Church." And I went, "Okay." So I went to church with her. And it was weird because what do I know from Jesus, as my dad would say. So I showed up and it was lovely and everyone was really fine and I sang and it was beautiful for a few Sundays. And then maybe a month in or a couple of months in, the pastor asked me to stay behind. And I was like 16 or something, right? And so I said, okay. And I thought, am I in trouble or what's going on here? So he said, just stay behind. So he does what the pastors do after the service, and thanks everyone for coming and glad handing and taking their money or whatever. And then he said, so come with me. And everyone was gone. And so he took me through the back of the church, across this gravel parking lot to this trailer. And I thought, this is weird. So I walk in, and I swear you guys, there was a card table and a bare swinging light bulb. I shit you not. And I said, what are we doing? And the youth pastor was there too, and he said, sit down. So I sat there like this strange Law and Order episode or something. I said, what have I done? And they said, isn't there something you think you need to tell us? And I said, I can't think of anything. And they said, well, why don't you just take a moment and just be with your thoughts and be with God and maybe it'll come to you. And I couldn't think of anything. I thought, do they want money? Like, I couldn't imagine. And I thought, maybe I've done or said something to offend someone, or I couldn't figure it out. And now I think I might. I think what they were getting at was, you're a queer. And we need you to say so we can do something about it. I have no evidence whatsoever. But when you look at these thousands of people whose first introduction to gay conversion therapy was through their church organization, I think it's probably not a stretch of the imagination to think if I hadn't sprayed gravel all over that place, getting the hell out of there, maybe I would have been subjected to it at some point. So I do have a personal dog in this fight, but I also have a professional dog in this fight, and just as a human being, I have a dog in this fight, and I hope that you will too. These are the two books at the source of the attack on gays and lesbians. I'm sure you all recognize the one on the left. Probably have one in your hotel room here. The one on the right is the so-called Bible of Psychotherapy, the DSM, right? The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. These books have a surprising amount in common. They both have a powerful influence over what people think about important issues. They have both existed in different versions throughout the years. They're both open to interpretation, meaning that different people will apply their contents differently. And they have both, at certain points, been interpreted as stating that homosexuality is bad. The information in those books is used by a lot of different groups, but I'm going to concentrate on briefly telling you about two. To date, these are the two largest gay conversion therapy organizations that have ever existed. They are Exodus International and NARTH, which stands for the National Association for Research and Therapy of Homosexuals. Exodus is primarily a religious organization. NARTH is primarily psychotherapy-based. That one bothers me more, given my profession. So let's begin by discussing Exodus. Exodus International was founded in 1976 by a couple of guys, Michael Bussey and Gary Cooper, after Bussey called a suicide hotline at a local church to help him deal with his depression over being gay. Exodus operated as a nonprofit, interdenominational, ex-gay Christian organization that set out to, quote, limit homosexual desires. Exodus is actually an umbrella organization for 120 local ministries in the US and Canada, and over 150 ministries in 17 other countries. So they were very successful indeed. Millions of dollars flowing in, lots and lots of people being subjected to their so-called therapy programs. Exodus's program utilized various methods over the years, each of which is ineffective and some of which are potentially damaging. They include pray the gay away. Obvious, right? Sit down, pray, and if you're a good Christian, then you'll be healed. Pseudo-counseling, which you wouldn't recognize as counseling. If there are any therapists in the room, you wouldn't even recognize it as being counseling. Same-sex retreats, which seem counterproductive at best. Almost makes me want to sign up. And language counseling, where I swear to you, it involves teaching young men to call each other dude and bro to make them heterosexual. Which would be laughable if it weren't so terrifying at the same time. So, we have to remember that these are basically good people. At least that's my opinion. I think good people can do harm as well, and they can certainly be harmed. There are very religious people who strongly believe that there is a God and an afterlife, and that they want to be a part of that. And in order to be a part of that, they have to be good. And in order to be good, they have to be straight. And that's the really sad thing, is that you have a perpetuation of victims on new victims. And they're very sure that they're right. And, as a result of that, we have problems because God hates the gays, obviously. Of course, the Bible gives us plenty of reasons for this, Exodus is driven by the interpretation of three key areas in the Bible, 2 from the Old Testament and at least 1 from the New Testament. So if anyone ever says to you, no, that was all Old Testament, Jesus changed everything, read your Bible, which I'm sure probably more of you have than the church service people, right? So Leviticus 18:22 is probably the most popular. Basically says, depending on which Bible you read, thou shalt not lie with mankind as with womankind. It is an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. So they don't pull any punches, obviously. Of course, not everybody follows those interpretations, and many Christians are now accepting of their LGBT congregants, but the ex-gay community has not progressed past the original interpretation of those quotes. And they see the accepting Christians as perverting the word of the Lord, not real Christians. I think they call that the no true Scotsman fallacy. Yeah, so now you'll recall that there were 2 founders, really. Michael Bussey and Gary Cooper. They founded Exodus International. Let me tell you a little bit about them. They were the very faces of Exodus. And as the money started rolling in, they started spending some of that money spreading the word about how you can be saved from your homosexuality through their program. So they went around the country, and in order to save money, they would often share hotel rooms. Some of you can smell the cooking. They became close. In fact, very close. Here they are at their commitment ceremony 3 years later. After which they then denounced ex-gay therapy, Exodus International, etc., the group that they helped create. Gary has since passed away, unfortunately, but Michael Bussey is still very much with us, and he still speaks out publicly against gay conversion therapy and is involved with numerous support groups for ex-gay therapy survivors. In a recent interview, Michael Bussey was asked, how many people did you see change their sexual orientation during the time that you were with this organization? He said, not one. He said, what I did see, however, was people becoming less and less sexual, less and less able to have meaningful relationships, less and less interested in humanity in some ways. So even he, the founder of Exodus International, admits he never saw anyone change. So with the loss of Bussey and Cooper, Exodus needed to scramble and get new leadership. And they eventually got a real darling. His name is John Polk. John Polk, there he is with his ex-lesbian wife, aren't they lovely? They kind of brought prominence to Exodus International. And in 1998, they were even featured on the cover of Newsweek magazine. So they brought the media into this, and a lot more money poured in. John Polk went around, much as the earlier leaders did, trying to spread the word and holding conventions and things like that. And in September of 2000, while on a speaking tour, Polk was spotted at a bar in Washington, D.C. called Mr. P's. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the Washington area, Mr. P's is a very popular gay bar. So someone recognized him and quickly called up a man named Wayne Bezin, who works for the Human Rights Campaign. Remember disposable cameras? Remember film? Okay, so he had a disposable camera, and he answered the phone, and his friend said, "You got to get down to Mr. P's right away." And he said, "It's the middle of the night. I'm an old man. I'm not coming down there." And they said, No. John Polk is here." And he said, "I'll be there in 5 minutes." So he grabbed his pants and put them on, threw his shoes on, grabbed a disposable camera. This is pre-cell phone. And he looked down, and he only had 3 shots left on it. I know, those are the days. So he runs out the door, and he gets in a cab, and he rushes down to Mr. P's, and he comes in sort of loudly, which was a mistake, admittedly, and Polk looked up and recognized him and panicked. And so Polk went running into the kitchen to try to get out a back exit. There's no back exit through the kitchen. So that, I imagine that the people back there were probably waving forks at him, "Get out of here!" And so he turned around and ran back out through and tried to get past Wayne, who then took a photo of his own shoe accidentally. So there's 1 shot down. And then he chased him out the door screaming, "How could you do this? How could you be here? You're a fraud, you're yada yada." And he later said he kind of regretted that because it was kind of sad. And Polk was screaming, "No, please, no." And it is kind of sad when you think about it, because he's as much a victim as anybody else, even though he became a victimizer. So one of the last shots that he got was this one. And that's Polk running away, trying to cover his face, saying, no, please, no. I don't know. And so then he was, it was all over the media and CNN and everything. And then he was asked by Exodus, "What were you doing there?" And he said, I didn't know it was a gay bar. And they must have said, all the guys there didn't, clue you in that there were no women. And he said, "Well, I was actually there trying to minister to them." And their attitude was kind of, "Nice try. You can go." So he was fired. Yeah. He has since then become a gay man again. And he's a chef now, and he doesn't like me. He not only unfriended me, he blocked me on Facebook because I was trying to contact him and ask him a few questions, and he didn't like that. He wants to forget all this past, so, stand in line. Lots of people don't like me. That's fine. Alan Chambers would take them to the height of popularity. He would, in fact, become the last leader of Exodus International. Alan Chambers, there he is again with his ex-lesbian wife. They always pair them up. These poor women, and their kids too. I have to think about their kids. A few years ago, Chambers appeared on Lisa Ling's program on the Oprah Winfrey Network called Our America. It's actually a very good program, and I really like her a lot. She's able to ask the hard-hitting questions without coming across as abrasive, and so people really, I think, are willing to take her questions and listen to her. She was asking them about the harm they might be doing to people, and what about this study, and what about that person I spoke to, and that sort of thing. And to her credit and his, it made him think. And so a short while after that, he asked Lisa Ling if she would come back and do a follow-up program because he had an important announcement. And that announcement was that Exodus International was shutting down. They would no longer be doing gay conversion therapy. Now, she asks him that question in this little video clip I'm about to show you, but she also asks him another question at the end that I want you to pay attention to how he answers it. Pardon me. There's no audio. Really? Okay, can you beef it up?
Got the audio.
We'll cut this part from the video. The one on front. Yeah. Can you push it all the way in? Okay.
So, what motivated the decision to stop reparative therapy?
The vast majority of people that I've met would say that there is some level of struggle or temptation or attraction that's resident there, whether it's a little or a lot. And I don't know whether someone can say that therapy changes that. You know, as I began to see and hear things that really disturbed and troubled me, I began to really share honestly within membership of Exodus, hey, this is what I see going on. About 7 months ago, I was very, very clear with our leadership in saying, we're going to have to move away from this type of therapy because I just don't think that we can refer people to something that can be detrimental to them.
Alan, you've been married to Leslie for how many years?
Almost 15.
Almost 15, and you have 2 beautiful children.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say you're heterosexual?
I have to be honest and say, of course I have temptations. Of course I have attractions related to the same sex. But for over 15 years since I've been in relationship with Leslie, my attraction has been towards her. My devotion has been towards her. Someone asked me the other day, are you stuck in this marriage? I'm not stuck in a marriage. I chose this marriage. She is the object of my desire. She is the object of my affection. I wouldn't choose anything or anyone else but her. And so am I heterosexual? I don't know.
I do. I mean, isn't that a strange way to answer a simple question like that? I think if you asked me, are you heterosexual? I'd say no. It would take like 1 second. And he rambles on and on. So, yeah. So, Alan Chambers said they were shutting down. I was suspicious. Call me a skeptic. Thank you. Go ahead, call me. So I decided to keep monitoring their website because I thought, look, money is king, right? I mean, when that much money is coming in and you got a good thing going, what are the odds that Lisa Ling's going to make this guy take a sharp left and all of a sudden he's just going to cut it off completely? And I thought, I'm going to keep an eye on this. I'm sure it wasn't the only one. Interestingly, after the supposed shutdown, I found that their website was still fully functional. I also saw that he apologized to the LGBT community. I do not accept his apology. Some of you may, that's fine, but I'm a little bit sick of these people doing horrible things and then turning around and saying, oopsie, and then all of us hugging them and saying it's okay. It ain't okay. Fine, I'm glad you quit, fine. But that doesn't change a whole lot as far as I'm concerned. We go forward, but I don't have to forgive. So I decided to check the website, and I kept checking. A few weeks after the supposed shutdown, the website was still there. They had changed their name to some innocuous weird thing, Speak Love. I don't know what the hell that means. And there's periods. Speak, period, love, period. And I thought, what are you though now? So he was really ambivalent about the whole thing. Nobody could really say what they were going to become. And then later on, he announced that, well, they were not going to do gay conversion therapy anymore, but they would exist as an organization for those gay and lesbian people who don't want to live a gay lifestyle. I still don't know what the hell that is. I've been gay for a minute now, and I don't know what the gay lifestyle is. I did laundry the other night. I guess that's the gay lifestyle on Thursday. Like, there is no gay lifestyle. So he means, of course, if you want to pretend to be heterosexual and then somehow wedge yourself into an opposite sex relationship, we're here for you. And I don't think that's very good either. So I kept checking their website. Then it morphed into this thing where, hey, you can buy my book, everybody. More money. You can hire me to come talk to your church group or other organization. No, thank you. So about 5 months in, I checked their website, and this strange error message came up, and it said, "This domain name for sale." So I bought it. So I now own the URL, ExodusInternationalNorthAmerica.org. I figured it was a good use of my husband's money. So now when you go there, you don't see their website, you see me giving this talk. One for us. Yeah. So we'll see what Exodus becomes or doesn't become. So far, it's still around in some really strange ways. So in addition to attacks by religious organizations, the LGBT community is also victimized by people in my field, in the field of psychology. And no one has been more successful than NARTH, the National Association for Research and Therapy of Homosexuality. This group, as I said earlier, actually bothers me even more than the religious groups because, they should know better. These are not religious people playing at being psychotherapists. These are actual psychologists, psychiatrists, and psychotherapists. They took the same kinds of ethics classes I took. They took practicum classes. They know psychology, or at least they should. I'm not saying there's no overlap with the religious organizations. There certainly is. You'll find a lot of the same names for these religious organizations on the NARTH website. So it's not like they're not connected. But as I said, these are trained professionals in the health field. Now, before I tell you about NARTH, let me give you a little bit of a history lesson and tell you about one of my favorite people in the field of early psychology. Up until the 1950s, Freud was kind of the only game in town. Everybody was kind of a Freudian or kind of a quasi-Freudian or neo-Freudian. And Freud kind of waxed and waned on his ideas about sexual orientation over the years. But if you ask these people from NARTH, they will say to you, hey, the big three, Freud, Jung, Adler, always thought that homosexuality was bad. And my reaction to that is, so what? Just because a bunch of old dead white dudes said something, it was old dead white dudes that created slavery, right? So, what do they call that? An appeal to antiquity, an appeal to an authority on top of that, right? So this woman actually created the first little chink in the armor. Her name was Evelyn Hooker, and she had a lot of gay friends. She actually met them through the earliest and first gay rights organization in the country called the Mattachine Society. Back in the 50s, it was illegal to be gay. In fact, it may surprise some of you to know that it was illegal to be gay until 2003 in 17 states in the United States. Pause for effect. Yeah. So Evelyn Hooker, she was working with some of these men, and many of them became friends of hers. And she was asking her fellow psychologists and psychiatrist colleagues what they thought about homosexuals. And they said, they're mentally ill. And she said, how do you know? And they said, well, from time to time we see them in our practice. And she said, what about the ones who don't come to your practice? And they said, shut up, or whatever. That's the problem with women. They ask questions we don't know the answer to. She said, well, maybe I'll go find out. So what she did was she went out and she secretly, because remember, this is like on the down low, right? It's illegal. So she asked some of her friends and their friends who were gay men if they would take part in a battery of psychiatric tests. Now, some of those tests by today's standards are pretty ridiculous, Rorschach ink blots and nonsense like that. But still, she did her best, right? She also went and got 30 exclusively heterosexual men. Interesting side note, she had a more difficult time finding exclusively heterosexual men than exclusively homosexual men. Interesting factoid. So then, once she got their psychiatric workups completely finished, she anonymized them, mixed them all up, and then submitted them to some of the top psychologists and psychiatrists in the country. And she said, sort them into two piles. And they couldn't do it. Not reliably. So, that piece of information got published as the adjustment of the male overt homosexual. Sounds a little clinical, but there it is. It would be used later by this gentleman, Dr. Robert Spitzer. He was the chair of the task force of the 3rd edition of the DSM. And up until that time, the DSM had always included homosexuality in its list of mental disorders. Partly because of Evelyn Hooker's work and others like her, and partly because he went and actually spoke to gay men and lesbians, which was something that hadn't been done up until that time. He ruled against inclusion of homosexuality in the 3rd edition of the DSM. This cannot be overstated as a monumental change in the way that we view gay people in our country. It had a cascade effect. In fact, one of my favorite headlines is this one that says, 20 million gay people cured overnight. So that's how you cure gays. You just don't consider them mentally ill anymore, right? So the formation of groups like NARTH, really, this was the spark of that, because it created a firestorm of controversy that still brews to this day. Imagine our shock and horror when Spitzer himself would later add fuel to that fire. Long hailed as the insightful leader of the movement to define homosexuals as normal, you can imagine our surprise and disappointment when in 2003, this article appeared in the Archives of Sexual Behavior, in which he claimed to have located gay men and lesbians who succeeded in permanently changing their sexual orientation. Would you like to guess how he measured that change? He asked them. Self-report. Now think about that for a millisecond. You know, a grade schooler could probably figure out that this is a really bad method. You've got highly motivated people who go through a program that probably wasn't all that easy, and then at the end you say, so did it work? And then some of them say, yeah, you know, maybe it did. Placebo, or they just wanted to please you, whatever it is. So someone pointed that out to Dr. Spitzer, and he went, oh yeah. And so he issued an apology, and he asked for a retraction. It won't surprise you to find out that that apology and retraction do not appear on these websites for ex-gay ministries, etc. Only this original published article does. So they still hail it as, even the great Dr. Robert Spitzer knows the truth. And there you have it. So we end up with groups like NARTH, led by this loony. He just died a couple of years ago. It was a waste of skin anyway. It's a real piece of shit. So this guy's Nicolosi, and Joseph Nicolosi created NARTH in 1992 with a few other people in Encino, California, dude. And, you know, remember, this group isn't made up of religious zealots. This is psychologists and psychiatrists. So they got together and they created 11 features, they call them, to cure gay people, known as the Nicolosi method. And these are they. You can see how stereotypical they are. Participate in sports activities. Avoid activities considered to be of interest to homosexuals. You know, museums, operas, plays, anything with culture. Stay the hell away from women. Unless, of course, it's for romantic contact, that kind of thing. Increase time spent with heterosexual men so that we can mimic their way of walking and talking and interacting. Attend church, there's that overlap. Attend reparative therapy to discuss progress or slipbacks. Have you slipped up today and had sex with a man? Becoming more assertive with women through flirting and dating, careful. Beginning heterosexual dating, eventually getting married, or having sex and then getting married, that's interesting, and fathering children. So this is the Nicolosi method. Let me introduce you to someone who uses it. This guy. Richard Cohn. Already everyone's moaning. Okay, so this is Richard Cohn. He is best known as a proponent and popularizer of holding therapy and bioenergetics, both of which are completely debunked quack psychotherapies. Cohn has an interesting background. He was raised Jewish. And with an accepting home. His father, as it turns out, was suffering from alcoholism and was very abusive toward him, but not because of his sexual orientation. They accepted his being gay, but he couldn't accept it. So he lived as a conflicted gay man until college, when he found some answers with the Unification Church of the Reverend Sun Young Moon. Yes, the Moonies. This is going back a ways. So he spent some time there, and then the Reverend assigned him to a wife, and he married her. And then he later joined something called the Wesleyan Healing Community, and in the early 1980s completely gave up his homosexual lifestyle. And he's been married for something like 25 years or something, and he has 5 children. And Cohn believes he was healed of his homosexuality through therapy and Jesus' love. So his books, he has 4 books, and I swear, you guys, I should get some kind of award just for reading this shit. It's so unpleasant. I do it so you don't have to. They're terrible books, especially for someone who works in the field. I mean, it just makes my toes curl. Things like Gay Children, Straight Parents and Coming Out Straight, which has a foreword by that moral shame factory, Dr. Laura Schlesinger. I know. I say that name to my students and they're like, who? And I'm like, oh, my God. Perhaps most horrifyingly, though, he wrote a children's book called Alfie's Home, in which you learn that you become homosexual because you have an overbearing mother, a distant father, and perhaps even an uncle who molests you. This is a children's book. It's written for children to read. So, yeah. I want you to take a look at his therapy. Just so you can assess it for yourself, you won't need a word from me. Here he is introducing his ideas, and then you get to see him demonstrating how to cure gay people.
Simple science demonstrates that opposites attract. If you have a positive charge and a negative charge, I have actually magnets in the garage. We have a south and a north. And a north and a south, what's going to happen?
Opposites attract.
They love each other. They love it, baby. They love it. Okay, let's flip this around. We got 2 north and 2 south. What's going to happen?
Repel.
Wah, 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 wah. You know that. They just can't do it. Okay, so why is a guy attracted to a guy? If opposites attract, it means he doesn't feel his guyness. He's looking to complete himself. If he felt masculine, he would say, ooh, hooking up with a guy? It's a non-sequential.
Non-sexual, it establishes like parent-child relationship. So he didn't experience this growing up with his dad.
Rob, do you feel a sexual connection right now?
No, I don't. I feel very safe and very comforted, and it just feels wonderful.
Another technique, bioenergetics, designed to help clients release memories stored in the muscles, in this case by hitting a pillow with a tennis racket.
I was angry at my mother.
Okay.
So I started saying, Mom! 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 Why did you do that to me?
Questions? I mean, I gave this talk at the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco one time, and this guy stood up and he said, but you didn't prove that doesn't work. I thought, you need me to prove that doesn't work? Tennis rackets? Really? Honey. Okay, so yeah. Cohn's frequent appearances on TV really backfired. He could have used Margaret Downey teaching him how to deal with the media appropriately, because he's just made an ass out of himself over and over again. First of all, he was on the Paula Zahn show, and he showed his stuff, and everyone sort of raised an eyebrow like, that's strange. Then there was a mocking piece on The Daily Show. You gotta look it up. Perhaps worst of all, though, there was this pathetic on-air battle with Rachel Maddow. You guys don't go up against Rachel Maddow. You will lose. She's a Rhodes Scholar. She takes no prisoners. So the result of that has been that ex-gay organizations have fast moved away from him as quickly as they can, and they began almost immediately removing his name from their websites. Even his own organization that he helped found, PFOX, removed all mention of him from their website almost overnight after that Rachel Maddow incident. So since he is not a licensed therapist, he operates the International Healing Foundation as a 501c3 nonprofit. And he asks clients not to pay him for therapy, but to make a donation. Isn't that lovely? It's also necessary because he's been banned for life from the American Psychological Association and the American Counseling Association for a series of ethical violations. So that's Cohn. Make of him what you will. Cohn's methods wax and wane from absurd to inappropriate even, but there are far worse techniques that are being used. These fall under a controversial category called aversion therapy. These are techniques that associate a negative, often even traumatic experience with an unwanted behavior, with the goal of decreasing the behavior's frequency. So in one such example from years past, therapists would give you a drug called Antabuse. Antabuse has no effect on you as long as you don't drink alcohol. But when you drink alcohol and they bind in your bloodstream, it makes you more violently physically ill than you've ever been in your life. I mean, people projectile vomit on this stuff. And so, it doesn't really have a lasting effect, so it's not used all that much. But the reason that I bring it up is because gay conversion therapists use a very similar technique using a drug called Ipecac. This is used in hospitals and poison control centers to make you throw up in case you've ingested something that's poisonous or what have you. And so what they do is they give this stuff to you while you're looking at same-sex images or videos or pornography, with the same kind of intent to build up an aversion to it because the nausea becomes associated with the images. These are cruel sessions that can last as long as 6 hours, and they take place in 3 to 4 day sessions, sometimes every other month or so. They're totally ineffective and cruel as well. As horrible as that sounds, far darker and more dangerous forms of aversion therapy are used in some groups. A victim of one such program who has spoken to me and allowed me to tell his story is a man named Sam Brenton. Sam Brenton was raised in a very religious home by itinerant preachers. And the result of that was he had a very close-knit family, and he shared everything with his parents, every thought, everything. He felt very close with them. And he told them one night over dinner that some of the boys had found a Playboy magazine and were looking through it. And his parents were concerned about this because they were kids, teenagers. And he said, "Oh, but don't worry, because when I looked at it, I didn't feel anything." And his father said, "What?" And he said, "I didn't feel anything because I guess, it's because I'm righteous in comparison to them." And he said, "But to be honest, sometimes I do feel that way about my friend Dale." Dale was a young man. So he said he remembers his father leaning toward him and his hands coming up, and then everything went black. And he woke up in the emergency room. And he had fallen down the stairs. And he said he would fall down the stairs several times after that before his mother finally took him to get help. And he thought this would be a good thing. It was a doctor, I don't know if it was a real doctor, who worked for these religious organizations. And he brought Sam into a room by himself. This is a teenager, mind you. And he closed the door and he turned around and said to him, "You're the last one." And Sam said, "The last what?" And he said, "You're the last homosexual. God killed all the others with AIDS. And if we don't fix you, you will die too. So let's get to work." This began a weeks-long series of tortures, really, at the hands of this so-called physician. The first one was that they put bricks of ice on Sam's hands while he looked at same-sex imagery. Now, most of this wasn't pornographic in any way. It was pictures from magazines or whatever of men holding hands or hugging, or one guy with an arm around another guy or what have you. They would take the ice away if they showed women or a man and a woman in an image. This progressed later to wire coils being put around his hands and attached to a car battery. They would then heat up the coils and give him extreme pain. He said not so much that it burned the flesh, because that might leave a wound someone would see, but enough that it really hurt and he would scream. At this point, he said, "I also have wondered more than once how a mother could sit in a hallway hearing her child scream and not come in and save him. In fact, she's the person who drove him there." Be that as it may, that lasted for a few days, after which they progressed to inserting needles under his fingernails and attaching those to the car battery. And again, each time they showed same-sex imagery, they would electrocute him. Of course, this didn't have any effect on his sexual orientation, but it has had profound effects on him. Now, the good news is that he's a smart guy. He actually graduated recently from MIT with a degree in nuclear engineering. He speaks 5 languages. He's in a relationship with a young man now, and he's doing okay. But he also has his dark periods. He he suffers from depression, he sees a therapist regularly, and he keeps suicide hotline numbers all around his apartment and friends close to him in case he ever has another episode, which he has had episodes. He also told me that he finds it difficult to be touched, even to this day. He said, it's not every time, but even if a man comes up and shakes hands with him, he said, I have to do this mental trick just in case, where I tell myself, I'm shaking his hand. He's not shaking mine. Because if the pain comes, I want it to be as if I'm doing it to myself. Because if it's him doing it to me, I may get to the point where I can't shake hands with anyone or ever be touched again. It's a sad case. It's not the saddest. This is perhaps the saddest case I've heard so far. This is Raymond Byes, who was just 15 years old when his parents took him to Echo Wild Game Rangers camp in South Africa for, quote, being too effeminate. They were afraid he might be gay. After 2.5 months at this camp, this is what was returned to his parents. Hospital staff described him as being severely malnourished, dehydrated. His arm was broken in 2 places. There were burns and wounds all over his body. He lay in intensive care for 4 weeks until he finally died. Raymond's roommate at the camp said that for some reason he had been singled out for a particular torture. They chained him to his bed most nights. They left him in his own soil. Tortures include being forced to eat his own feces. Camp leaders regularly put a pillowcase over his head and shocked him with a cattle prod. A later investigation revealed that 2 other boys had died at the camp in 2007. Their deaths were at first declared heart attacks. They were 18 and 19 years of age. Unlikely. Because of Raymond Byes' death, those bodies were then exhumed and they were found to have died from strangulation. So the leaders of this camp, these monsters, are now serving very long prison sentences. But of course, that doesn't do anything to bring these kids back from their death. So in February of 2012, we finally got some hope here in California. A law got introduced by Ted Lieu, Senator Ted Lieu. It was a bill making gay conversion efforts partially illegal. Jerry Brown signed the bill in October of 2012. So far, there are a handful of states, 8 or 9 states, depending on what sources you read, that partially ban gay conversion therapy. Unfortunately, the bans don't go far enough. The states that you see here, and there are a couple of others, do have bans, but the problem with these bans is that they only apply to very specific circumstances. Only to people under the age of 18 as victims, and also only to licensed healthcare or mental health care professionals, leaving very large loopholes, because we know that there are plenty of adults who are being subjected to this, and there are also plenty of clergy out there who apparently, according to these laws, can do this to anybody. It doesn't stop them at all. On the political landscape, it's also worth mentioning that so far, every high-level cabinet appointee that Donald Trump has appointed has a very long history of being anti-LGBT, including the bulletproof vest, Mike Pence. Because if you're wishing for an impeachment and removal, be careful what you wish for. The problem with Mike Pence isn't just that he is in many ways like Trump, it's that he knows how the political system works. He was a governor. And back in 2000, while running his re-election as governor, he had this statement on his website where he was discussing federal funding of HIV/AIDS prediction. He said, resources should be directed toward those institutions which provide assistance to those seeking to change their sexual behavior. Now, the precise meaning of those words has been hotly contested since the presidential election, and Pence's spokesperson said they absolutely do not refer to gay conversion therapy, but it should be pointed out that Mike Pence also has a very poor rating on LGBT issues. So let me give you a little bit of hope here that we can end with. It's a story about this organization, Jonah, Jews offering new alternatives to homosexuality. They're up all night thinking of these acronyms. It was founded in 1999. The problem with Exodus is that they were in New Jersey, and New Jersey has very strict consumer fraud laws. And they said that they could cure your homosexuality within 2 years at a 65 to 70% success rate. So these are the monsters that created it, both of whom had gay sons. This guy actually is a convicted felon for some of the stuff he did on Wall Street. He was a psychotherapist for about a minute until he found out he had a felony and lied about it. Now he's not even that. So after this young man, Benjamin Unger, took them to court, within a matter of a few hours, the judge came back and said, you have 8 weeks to shut down. And they shut down. So Jonah no longer exists. What can you do about it? You just did part of it. You listened to my talk. The next thing you can do is support PFLAG. PFLAG stands for Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. It is a national organization that provides assistance to people, the very people who might take their kids to these monsters. If you'd like to hear more of my ramblings, you can listen to my podcast, Shell Shock. Thank you for your kind attention.
Sheldon Helms, ladies and gentlemen. Fantastic. Yeah. I have one question, actually. Is most of the conversion men? Most of these conversion therapies
most of it is, yeah. It's a
men?
very limited talk, and I apologize. It is LGBTQ that they're after, but the majority of their targets are men.
Yeah.
But that's not to discount the suffering of other groups.
Right.
Yeah.
But percentage-wise, the more conversions are done on.
We can't really say for sure,
quote unquote.
but yeah. The reason is because, and I was telling Abby earlier, feminism and gay rights overlap massively. I see these lovely bumper stickers that say, all love is love, and things like that. Believe me, they don't care who we love. They care who we have sex with. That's what it boils down to. And when two men have sex with each other, the reason that upsets people is because it's as if they're being like women. And nobody wants to be like a woman. Those aren't my words. Those are actually the words of Quentin Crisp. He said there's no sin like being a woman. And ain't that the damn truth? So you scratch a homophobe, you find an anti-woman misogynist. So they're very much the same battles. So yeah, that's why they concentrate, because nobody takes women and women having sex seriously until it affects them and they get turned down or whatever. That's my ideas. I have no proof of any of that shit. But that's how I interpret it after years of being a gay man.
Once again, Sheldon Helms. Sheldon Helms. Thank you, Sheldon. Wonderful.